This may appear to be a typical American college football game. However, there was nothing ordinary about this man's presence on the sideline. His name? Alija Izetbegović. At this moment in time, November 4th, 1995, Izetbegović was the president of the fledgling independent state of Bosnia-Herzegovina. For over 3.5 years, the Muslim-majority country and its capital, Sarajevo, formerly the most multi-ethnic city in the Balkans, had been largely in a state of intense siege. So how did he end up here of all places, on the sideline of an American college football game at the University of Louisville? Well, the most immediate reason is the man to his left, Mohammad Satsir Bey. Satsir Bey had been born to Muslim parents in Sarajevo during the Tito era in communist Yugoslavia. His parents were both doctors and quite intellectual, and their anti-communist politics prompted them to leave Yugoslavia in 1963, taking their young son with them. After several years abroad, the family eventually came to America and settled in Parma, Ohio, with the family becoming naturalized American citizens in 1973. Muhammad, now going by the nickname Mo, earned a football scholarship to Tulane University and later also attended grad school at Tulane. The Green Wave were in fact Louisville's opponent in this game, so on the surface it may not appear that unusual for an alumnus to be on the sideline watching his old squad. But why were they in Louisville, and why was President Izetbegović there while his country was in the middle of a war? Well, simply, this represented a unique opportunity to potentially end the war and the associated atrocities. That's largely the responsibility of another man, longtime American diplomat Richard Holbrooke. The opportunity for peace in Bosnia had been narrowly missed on several occasions over the prior 3 years. The primary hang-up had always been that there were too many parties involved. You had the Bosnian Republic representing the Bosnian Muslims, then there were the Bosnian Serb representatives, but also Serbia itself. Likewise, there were the Bosnian Croat representatives and Croatia itself. Any deal had to be approved by all 5 parties, each with their own interests, even vis-a-vis their patron states. In 1994, pressure from Washington had forced the Bosnian Croats to reaccede into Bosnia-Herzegovina, forming a federation with the Bosnian Muslims. However, the Bosnian Serb breakaway state, the Republic of Srpska, remained, and the war continued into 1995, even intensifying. In July, international observers had been shocked at the depths this war had sunk to following the Bosnian Serb capture of Srebrenica, a Bosnian Muslim enclave, and the subsequent execution of its entire male population. This, combined with Bosnian Serb attacks on UN peacekeepers and their constant shelling of civilian areas in Sarajevo, did not make the Bosnian Serbs very popular on the international stage and led war crimes charges to be slapped on the Bosnian Serb leadership even while the conflict was still ongoing. In the bigger picture, these incidents led to a renewed international impetus to make peace. All previous peace proposals had been negotiated by the European community or its member states. However, they were undermined by the need to exact universal agreement from all the different parties. For example, the last serious peace proposal before 1995 had been in 1993, the Vance-Owen Plan. This plan had even been endorsed by Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, who was widely seen as the sponsor of the Bosnian Serbs. However, despite all the other parties, including Serbia, agreeing to it, the Bosnian Serb parliament rejected the agreement, and 2 more years of increasingly bloody warfare followed. Now, in 1995, there was a new plan, this time led by the Americans. President Bill Clinton appointed Assistant Secretary of State Holbrooke as his lead negotiator, while Holbrooke and Secretary of State Warren Christopher came up with a carrot-and-stick strategy. The NATO alliance began a bombing campaign of Bosnian Serb positions, especially the heavy weapons in the hills surrounding the besieged Sarajevo, along with critical communication infrastructure, such as the phone lines to the temporary Bosnian Serb capital, Pale. Holbrooke then conducted several rounds of shuttle diplomacy, not only trying to get each side to agree to attend a new peace conference, but also to get the Croat and Serb factions within Bosnia to agree that their respective national presidents could represent their factions at the conference. This would reduce the number of negotiating parties from 5 down to 3. After several rounds of visits to the Balkan capitals, Holbrooke was able to get each of the parties on board with this plan, except for the Bosnian Serbs. As the shuttle diplomacy in the Balkan capitals was ongoing, tragedy struck the American delegation as they were attempting to use small mountain roads to get into the besieged city of Sarajevo. The French armored personnel carrier in which much of the delegation was riding fell off the edge of the mountain track, tumbling hundreds of feet. 4 of the occupants died, including one of the main American strategists at the talks, longtime diplomat Robert Fraser, along with 2 other American diplomats and their French driver. Meanwhile, Dick Holbrooke and Wes Clark had separately taken a Humvee up the road and thus were uninvolved in the incident. A memorial for Ambassador Fraser and the other 3 killed still sits alongside the wrecked armored personnel carrier at the base of the mountain, a perpetual reminder that in this war even the diplomats were not safe. Still, even amidst the tragedy, Holbrooke had to rally the team to push on. Just as with the Vance-Owen plan 2 years earlier, Milosevic's desire for peace to secure Serb gains went undermined by his own Bosnian Serb clients. They had thus far been unable to negotiate with Holbrooke directly due to being charged with war crimes, but to break the impasse, Holbrooke agreed to meet directly with the Bosnian Serb leaders, Radovan Karadzic and General Ratko Mladic. The tough-nosed negotiator, Holbrooke, who'd been tasked by Clinton to almost bully the sides into a peace conference, was still unable to get them to agree to a ceasefire that would allow a peace conference to take place, even despite the ongoing NATO bombardment of Bosnian Serb positions, and the meeting eventually devolved into a shouting match, causing Holbrooke and General Wesley Clark to walk out. It was then Milosevic himself who put his foot down. He reminded the Bosnian Serbs that if they didn't agree to a ceasefire and allow Milosevic to negotiate for them at a peace conference, NATO would continue to bomb the Bosnian Serb army into defeat. Plus, Milosevic threatened to cut off future funding for their breakaway state, which was entirely propped up by Serbia. Adding even more heat to their situation was the defeat in early August of their fellow Serb breakaway state in Croatia. Backed into a corner by Holbrooke and by their own patron, the Bosnian Serbs finally relented. A ceasefire came into effect on October 5th, and the siege of Sarajevo was finally lifted, with Russian peacekeepers replacing the Bosnian Serb troops surrounding the city. Holbrooke's first monumental task was complete. He'd successfully convinced the warring parties to agree to his format for a peace conference. The next, even more monumental task then began, to somehow find a mutually agreeable solution that would end the war. For this, Holbrooke and Christopher decided on a 17-day conference. They wanted a secure location, yet they also wanted the 3 Balkan presidents and their negotiators to be able to interact with each other without going through security, and also without having to answer any questions from the media, allowing for free-flowing, off-the-record negotiations. The perfect answer turned out to be Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. The conference officially opened on November 1st. Joining Secretary Christopher as a chairman of the conference was European Union Special Envoy Carl Bildt, the former Swedish Prime Minister. Holbrooke essentially retained his role as lead moderator of the negotiations. He would be joined most of the time by another longtime State Department official, fluent Serbo-Croatian speaker Chris Hill, who in 2022 is the current American ambassador to Serbia. Despite Bosnian President Izetbegovic's desire for a unitary state, it was quickly agreed in the opening days of the conference that Bosnia would become a confederation. The Croat and Muslim areas would remain federalized with each other, while the Republic of Srpska entity would become part of Bosnia as its own separate component. In return for this concession from Izetbegovic, the Americans guaranteed to enforce any peace deal with troops under their own command. That in contrast to the ineffective UN peacekeeper presence during the years of war. With these matters agreed upon in the first 3 days of the conference, Day 4, the first Saturday since the opening of the conference, became an opportunity to relax a bit for many of the principals involved. Milosevic left the base with a security detail to go visit a shopping mall, purchasing 2 pairs of shoes. Meanwhile, the Bosnian delegation was divided on how to spend the day. Sasir Bey saw an opportunity he couldn't pass up. His old squad, the Tulane football program, was set to play just 2 hours from Dayton at the University of Louisville. Sasir Bey not only wanted to attend the game himself, but he wanted to bring the 70-year-old Izetbegovic with him. Holbrooke, along with Sasir Bey's rival within the Bosnian delegation, Prime Minister Haris Salajić, tried to convince Sasir Bey to drop the plan and tried to convince Izetbegović not to go along with it. It was a cold, windy November day in the upper Midwest, plus would require a 2.5-hour car ride to get there, so there was concern for the health of President Izetbegović. Holbrooke also added that it didn't seem to fit with the serious and somber nature of the conference. However, the Bosnian president agreed to go, looking a bit out of place on the sideline, bundled up in his winter clothes next to Sasir Bey. What a bizarre and unusual moment this was, with the seriousness of the peace conference tempered by this moment of levity. Louisville won the game going away, 34-14. Afterward, Holbrooke asked Izetbegović who'd won, and he replied, "I don't know, but I think it was the guys in red shirts." The humorous moments of this day of relaxation would not last. As negotiations resumed, deadlock set in. Although each of the parties had already agreed to a confederal structure for the future Bosnian state, working out the final internal borders between the Muslim Croat Federation and the Republic of Srpska proved to be difficult and took the entire remaining 2 weeks to agree upon, nearly falling apart several times even in the final minutes of the conference's last day, as the sides continued to negotiate how to modify the ceasefire boundaries and create a 51-49 ratio. The conference was even extended by 4 days to make up for the lost weekend time, including the football trip, yet negotiations extended deep into the early morning hours on the final day. In the dawn hours of November 21st, Holbrooke and his team were beginning a post-mortem on the conference, as it seemed to have ended in failure despite the exhaustive efforts of everyone involved. However, Milosevic then burst into the room and announced that they'd made an agreement. In fact, the peace deal was back on. That day, the three warring presidents put their signatures on the arduously negotiated deal. Against all odds, and after 4 years of failed peace initiatives, the Dayton Accords had finally brought the Bosnian War to an end. Although an unwieldy solution that has been beset by its own problems, the Dayton Agreement remains the basis for Bosnian statehood today. Whenever saber-rattling is engaged in by one of the factions, it should always be noted how difficult the current peace was to come by, and the depraved amount of bloodshed that it stopped. The Dayton Agreement was certainly one of the seminal geopolitical moments of the 1990s, and of the post-Cold War Pax Americana. Despite the still ongoing factional bickering, the deal at least provides a framework to prevent these tensions from spiraling into war again, and the hope is that this delicately crafted peace will last for many years to come. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, check out the project that forms the basis for these videos at apoliticalworldmap.org, and donate on Patreon if you can. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Alex. I am out.